Okay, so I'm doing this again because when I did it last night, the video got all screwed up. I don't know how, but somehow the audio and video got out of sync. Really hoping that doesn't happen again this time. I'm doing a review of WandaVision, the Disney Plus show. I'm going to do a review of all the Marvel shows after their seasons are done. This show in particular, it wasn't so much a season as it was just a mini series, a 9-episode mini series. Because I think they said there isn't going to be a second season, and considering how it ended, I don't see how there would be. Like the story wrapped up pretty succinctly. As the name suggests of the show, it starred Wanda Maximoff and the Vision, two of the Avengers characters. One of the criticisms that's a fair criticism of Marvel movies and TV shows, especially what makes them different from the DC stuff, is that whereas the DC stuff, they really let their directors tell whatever kind of story they want, which can have mixed results. The Marvel movies are definitely have been criticized. I read someone saying, it looks like they're movies written by algorithm, or some even said it looks like they're written by committee. The latter I think, is more accurate because it definitely seems like there's a group, or at least there was a group in mind to tell a story. I think now it's more down to that guy Kevin Feige, but it seems like it's kind of like the editorial department at the Marvel Comics themselves, where you have editorial, they want to build towards a bigger story. What is known as an event comic book. It's something that happens in comic book storytelling where, like, it used to be every couple of years. Now it's about once a year. The comic book companies will have one big event, usually something that happens over the summer or around that point of the year. And that big event was usually something that was built towards. Maybe in one comic book or in multiple comic books, but it's a storyline that was being built to over months or maybe even a year. Building to this big event happening that brings in all these different characters. And that's something they did in the movies with all their various different, standalone Avengers characters movies to the Avengers films themselves and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Everything had a connection. Like to build to the Avengers, they introduced S.H.I.E.L.D. as sort of a connecting element. And then as they were putting the Avengers together, they had to introduce, they ended up introducing an Infinity Stone, and then the Avengers movie, they introduced another Infinity Stone, as well as Thanos. And then they introduced more Infinity Stones, and they built this big story that culminated in Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And I like that not only did they do that because it felt like a big event thing in movie form, which is really cool in my opinion. Definitely the immature part of me thought that was cool, but I'm a very immature person. Oh, excuse me. What was I saying? Oh yeah. I thought that was really cool, but I also like that they haven't completely They just haven't completely glossed over that, because the TV shows definitely deal heavily with the events of, especially those last two movies. In the case of WandaVision, like pretty much every movie she's been in, it's dealing with events of that, because this is a show that deals heavily with reaction to trauma. And it kind of brings some criticism to the Avengers, because it's like they just sort of left their characters alone to their own devices without any regards for how what they've been through might have affected them, or how these effects might have reactions on other people, because Wanda Maximoff is an incredibly powerful character. Even, she didn't know how powerful she was, but even still, she's a wildly powerful, and if she became emotionally or mentally unstable, that could be really dangerous. So, of course, that's what happens. Uh, the one interesting thing about the show is that they tried something very unique. It was almost sitcomish because it parodies sitcoms. It parodies sitcoms from different decades, starting out with, the first episode seems like a very 1950s-ish sitcom, and the second episode is 1960s-ish. Then, that the first two episodes are in black and white, and then, they each have their own unique openings. I can't quite tell what the opening of the first episode was supposed to be. I thought it might be Ozzy and Harriet. I don't know. It's them driving in a car. It looked familiar, but I can't remember from what. But it definitely took influence from, like, I Love Lucy and shit like that. And the second episode, the intro was very much like Bewitched, but it also took influence from, like, shows like Dick Van Dyke and shit. The third episode, the intro was very Partridge Family, and the episode itself seemed almost completely reminiscent of the Brady Bunch. Their house even changed as the decades went on, and it looked like the Brady Bunch house. During this happening, Wanda and Vision are living in this town in New Jersey where they are supposed to be. They don't want people to know that they're ex superheroes, so they try to hide their powers. And you're wondering, what's going on? Why are they living this weird sitcom life? Is something being done to Wanda? How the hell is Vision back to life? Why is everyone in the town acting weird? Because the people seem to act like they know something's wrong, but they don't want to admit it. It's kind of like, it's almost reminiscent of that episode of The Twilight Zone, which is a show from the 60s, where the kid has, like, godlike powers, and everybody has to pretend like everything's okay, even though it's obviously not, because they're all scared of what happens if they, even have a bad thought. So, damn. So yeah, as the show goes on, you start to realize that it isn't this idyllic, weird sitcom world. That something's very wrong, and Wanda seems to be in denial about it, and then you realize that Wanda might very well be in control of it. At the end of episode 3, there's a character, this black woman who keeps showing up, who showed up in episode 2, and she and Wanda became friends, and also Wanda became pregnant at the end of episode 2. And also at the end of episode 2, the world just transforms from black and white into color, so a lot of weird things happen. And by pregnant, I mean she doesn't just find out she's pregnant, I mean she becomes noticeably, like, a couple months along pregnant within a minute. So like I said, a lot of weird shit happens. At the end, she has a weird confrontation with the black woman. I think her name when she was in the town was Geraldine. I think that was it. But she says something that makes Wanda upset, that makes her remember the outside world and who Wanda is, and that upsets Wanda. And then she gets thrown out of whatever the hell's happening in this weird world. And she ends up outside of the town in New Jersey, where there seems to be some sort of military quarantine set up. Then we get to episode 4, where we take a break from the sitcom stuff and we learn what the hell is happening. We get a better idea of what the hell is happening. That black woman is Monica Rambeau, who's an agent of S.W.O.R.D. She was blipped out of existence by Thanos 5 years ago, and then came back, or 6 years ago, came back 5 years later to find out that her mother, who was the director of S.W.O.R.D., has died of cancer. So she had her whole life turned upside down and had to now live not only with the fact that she lost 5 years of her life with the world moving on, but she also, missed her mother dying and has to deal with the grief that her mother is gone. She comes back to S.W.O.R.D. with a new director, and he sends her on a mission to help an FBI agent named Jimmy Woo, who you might remember from the Ant-Man movie, the second Ant-Man movie, who has an informant missing in a town that everyone has lost contact with, and according to the police doesn't exist, even though they can clearly see it. But they can feel that there's something that doesn't want them to go into the town, and when they try to send a drone in, the drone just disappears. And then Monica tries to go through and just gets sucked in. That's how she just randomly ended up in Wanda's sitcom. So they bring in scientists. One of them is the scientist played by Kat Dennings from the Thor movies. And she figures out that there's some sort of signal coming from the town, and she gets a television set to start decoding the signal, and she realizes it comes off as a sitcom, so she just starts watching the sitcom. They see Monica's in it, and then Monica gets shot back out, and Monica says it's Wanda. She's behind everything. But she's oddly sympathetic, even though Wanda literally threw her out of this town. So now she's gone through the barrier twice. She went into it once and then got thrown back out of it. And she's very sympathetic towards Wanda because she knows something must be wrong with her. Her director tells her that Wanda stole the Vision's body because SWORD, which was a group put in charge of disposing of, things like the Vision if they were being decommissioned, was in charge of taking his body apart so nobody could use it as a weapon. But he says that Wanda stole it, and she must have rebuilt Vision in the town. Anyways, that turns out to be a lie, but they don't find that out till later. They also find out that there's something that Monica has changed. Monica, I think I said her name was Monica Rambeau, but yeah. Monica has changed. Her going through the barrier twice has changed her. It's some kind of weird chaotic energy that alters anything it touches. That's why everything in the town keeps changing the way it looks. Why it was in black and white, and why it's the buildings and clothing and everything seems to be changing from decade to decade. But yeah, so all this is happening. They find out they can't really send anyone into the town without something changing. So Monica gets the idea that, hey, what if we sent something into the town that was already in the time, it already came from the time frame. By this time, Wanda has now already moved on to an 80s style, where the intro was very Family Ties, where it was all painted at the beginning. It looked like a painting at the beginning. And she and Vision are raising their two kids. The kids can age just at random. They start out as babies, then they turn into 5-year-olds, and then eventually 10-year-olds. So they get allowed to have a dog. The dog dies, and Wanda stops them from aging anymore, and she tells them that they have to deal with grief. And she ends up talking about her brother a little bit. Her brother, Pietro. While this is happening, Vision has a revelation that he's starting to get suspicious that something is very wrong in town, and then he realizes that he can that there's something wrong with the people. They're acting too, almost like they're programmed to act the way they act, and he realizes that he can take them out of that programming temporarily, and he realizes that something terrible is happening to them, that they're being forced against their will to act this way, that someone's forcing their thoughts, forcing their will on them, and he comes to the conclusion that it has to be Wanda. So he confronts Wanda about this. She doesn't like this and tries to avoid the conversation entirely, and they almost come to blows over it. And he also points out something like that there's no kids in the town. He goes, I never see any children. While he's having this confrontation with her, and Wanda says she doesn't know what's happening, which is true, but she knows something is wrong. She just doesn't want to deal with it. And while that happens, all of a sudden her brother shows up. But it's not her brother. It's Evan Peters, who played Quicksilver in the Fox X-Men movies. It was supposed to be a little, like, a little wink, a little fourth wall breaking there. But she seems surprised by him, but she accepts that it's her brother because everything about what's going on is weird. Oh, before that, I remember I said that they were trying to send something into the town that matched the time, that matched the actual time it was in. They sent a drone made of 1980s technology in to confront Wanda, and when that didn't work, they try to shoot a missile at her, and that really doesn't work. She actually comes out of the barrier and gives them their drone back that she took down with her powers, and then basically threatens to kill the director of S.W.O.R.D. if he doesn't leave her alone. And she makes her point very well. She literally controls his own soldiers to point their guns at them, their guns at him. Let's see. That was episode 5. Episode 6 is a Halloween episode that it was like a Halloween themed episode, but so now finally there's kids in town, and now it's the opening was reminiscent of Malcolm in the Middle, which even though we're supposed to be in the 90s, Malcolm in the Middle was a show that started in the 2000s, very early 2000s, so it still had a little bit of a 90s feel to it, but it was a 2000s show. But whatever, I'm not going to nitpick over it. Now Pietro's part of the show. Wanda has also had a friend throughout every iteration of the sitcom that she's living in, named and her neighbor named Agnes, who's been very friendly and at times acted a little weird around her, weirder than anybody else, but she's the only one. She, at one point in the 5th episode, even acknowledged that it was kind of like a TV show, asking if she wanted her to do a takeover again. But Wanda just completely ignored that. She just ignored all the weird behavior people have. She seems suspicious of her brother, asking why he looks different. He just kind of waves it off like, hey, everything about this is weird. And he seems to acknowledge of what she's doing, about how she's controlling people, about how she kept the kids locked in their rooms so they wouldn't be directly under her influence. And Vision goes seeking out to the borders of the town to see what's happening, and he realizes that he gets farther away from the center where Wanda is. Like, everybody's acting more almost robotic. And he runs into Agnes, who seems to be doing the same, and he does this thing where he touches her and he takes her out of whatever programming is happening to her, and she says a lot of weird shit, like about how he's dead. So he gets very suspicious, and he decides to just keep walking to see how far he can go. While this is happening, Wanda is dealing with her brother, and her kids realize they have powers. Her one son, they have their 2 sons, Billy and Tommy, the twin boys. Tommy has speed like Pietro, and Billy comes to realize that he has powers like his mother, his weird psychic, chaotic energy powers. Vision tries to leave the barrier and gets torn apart doing it, suggesting that he can't leave, which causes Wanda to expand her the borders of her barrier even more, exerting herself. She realizes that Pietro isn't her brother, or the fake Pietro isn't really her brother, and she shoots him away. She brings a lot of the S.W.O.R.D. agents into her hex, as they're calling it, including the Kat Dennings doctor from S.W.O.R.D. Or from Thor, I mean. And in the morning, now we've moved on to the 2000s to 2010s sitcom. And that is... where the intro is now very much like a little bit like WandaVision, a little bit like The Office and Modern Family. And the setup is too, because it has that fourth wall, talking directly to the camera, break shit. And Wanda's a little messed up because she's obviously pushed herself too far, and she's losing control of the hex, and things keep changing against her will. And she doesn't know where Vision is. Vision is kind of still at the borders of the town. He wants to get back to his wife. He manages to take Darcy, that's her name, Darcy, the Kat Dennings character, out of her mind control so she can tell him what she knows. And she tells him about how he died, and about how Wanda seems to not be dealing with the trauma very well. At the end of this episode, we find out that Wanda's friend Agnes is actually Agatha Harkness, an ancient witch. And she's in town because she knows that Wanda is using magic, even if Wanda doesn't realize it. And she wants to learn exactly how powerful she is and how she can use as much magic as she does. And she takes Wanda's kids, Billy and Tommy, hostage. She even gets her own nice little theme song, which was pretty cool. At the end, then in the next episode, it's all about, it details the various things of Wanda's life, which is a lot of trauma, and about a lot of how she didn't deal with trauma, about how she learned to speak English by watching old sitcoms, and how sitcoms basically just kind of became her, her comfort thing, the thing she dealt with when she was dealing with hard things. And it basically led to how after she lost her parents, she had Pietro, and she and Pietro joined Hydra. And then after being transformed by Hydra, they only had each other. Then after he died, she only had the Avengers and Vision. Then when she came back after the 5 years, the Avengers were broken up and Vision was dead, so she was just alone. And it just shows how, and that's where you learn that the director of Sword, Hayward, he lied about her stealing Vision's body. She just wanted to see it, and she does, and she realizes he's gone, and she goes to this town in New Jersey because that's where Vision planned to, like, were the two of them to go live. He bought a plot of land where they could build a house and the two of them could live. And when she goes there, she kind of has like a little mental breakdown, and then all of a sudden, just all this energy shoots out of her, and the hex that she created starts, and she turns the town into the 1950s sitcom, and all of a sudden, Vision just appears out of her. She just recreated him out of thin air. Meaning that the Vision in her town isn't the real Vision. So where is the real Vision? Well, it turns out Hayward was lying because he put Vision back together into the White Vision, which was reminiscent from the comics where Vision was taken apart and put back together. And he got energy from the drone that Wanda shut down and used it to restart Vision, who he sends back into town to kill Wanda. Wanda is dealing with Agatha now, who wants to steal Wanda's power, and the two of them fight. Now the last, it was against the sort of algorithm, or the sort of cliched way of doing things that Marvel movies had been doing so far, but now as we got to this last episode, it gets very much into that. It abandons the weird quirkiness, and now it's, Wanda fights Agatha while her Vision fights the White Vision, and it's just these two superhero battles going on at once. Monica snuck back into town, and going through the hex a third time completely changed her. Now she has some weird energy powers like she has in the comic books. Monica was actually the first Captain Marvel, the first female Captain Marvel in the comic books. The first Captain Marvel was a dude. He was an alien man. But she was the first female Captain Marvel and the only black Captain Marvel. She got some weird energy abilities. I don't remember how. It was some sort of weird accident, something. But anyways, it's not really important. But she has powers like that. So Monica, Billy, and Tommy have to deal with. Hayward made his way into town because Wanda sort of opens up the barriers to the town, because when Agatha makes her realize that she's been controlling everybody and making them feel her pain, she freaks out and she just at first lashes out at the people. Then when she realizes what she's doing, she opens up the barrier so they can leave. And when that happens, Sword can come in, so Billy, Tommy, and Monica have to deal with them. Wanda almost takes down the barrier, but she realizes that if she just takes down the spell completely, Vision and her children, who were created by the spell, will also disappear, and she doesn't want to do that. Agatha reveals to her that she's actually the legendary myth of the Scarlet Witch, who's the most powerful magic user on Earth. They can manipulate untold. They can just manipulate chaos magic on a whim, and that's essentially what she's been doing. And that there's a whole chapter dedicated to her in the Darkhold, which is an ancient book of black magic. And at the end, Wanda's Vision, manages to convince the White Vision that, maybe neither one of us is actually the Vision, because the original Vision was destroyed and you're rebuilt from him, but I'm his personality that you don't have. And then he manages to awaken the old Vision's memories inside of the White Vision, and he just sort of flies away, meaning he's gained some semblance of sentience. So the Vision is back in a sense. Wanda manages to defeat Agatha by using her own tricks against her, and then fully accepts her place as the Scarlet Witch. And then she turns Agatha back into Agnes and just says she'll be trapped in this town. She has to stay there. So she basically takes her will away. And then she eventually takes down the spell and loses the Vision and her kids. They manage to stop Hayward, and he goes to jail for all the shit he does. Here's where it gets kind of weird, because Wanda did awful things. She didn't intend to. Like, it wasn't like she planned for this to happen, but it did happen. And when she realized it was happening, she didn't confront what she was doing. She didn't acknowledge it. She just wanted to ignore it because what she was doing was making her happy, which is completely fucking abusive. And they just sort of give her a pass on that. Like, even Monica gives her a pass. Like, because Monica was also feeling grief. She's like, I understand it. She's like, and I would probably do what you did. It's like, you would willfully hurt people because it makes you feel better? It's not okay to hurt others just because you felt pain. That's a horrible message to send, and it's a completely anti-heroic thing. So I get... It's gonna come back to a theme that Marvel is trying to tackle these bigger issues, this time tackling the issue of grief. So these big complicated issues, but the message they come away with them is sort of lacking. It's like, it's not just okay, but in the end, Wanda flies off and she's gone into a secluded place because she realizes she's too dangerous to be around others in the state she's in until she learns to control her powers. So she's studying the Darkhold so she can learn her powers more. Although isolating yourself when you're dealing with psychological trauma is also a thing you shouldn't do. Most psychologists say that. But you can see why she's doing it, considering the last time she was around a populated area, what she did to people. So at least she's trying to take responsibility now to some degree, although you would say it's like, if she really wanted to take responsibility, she has to be punished for what she did, but whatever. But in the end, it shows her studying there was two after credit scenes, one with Monica being asked by a Skrull to go meet with Nick Fury, which means they're going to be leading up either to Secret Invasion or the next Captain Marvel movie, because she was a character from the first Captain Marvel movie as a kid. Or also, and then in the secondly, the last after credit scene, it showed Wanda studying her magic in the whatever isolated area she was in, and all of a sudden she hears her kids screaming, which means they're not really gone, which harkens back to the comic books, where the children she created out of thin air were. It was revealed that they were just pure chaos magic, so their souls and essence were stolen by Thanos, or not Thanos, Mephisto, the demon. I believe it was Mephisto. But then they came back later as teenagers, and apparently their souls had gone into these two teenagers, so it turned them in to Wanda's kids, even though they were, born by other people. And yeah, their names are still Billy and Tommy. They're identical twins, even though they're technically not genetically related. And they have the powers that were demonstrated in the shows. In the comic books, they became founding members of the group called the Young Avengers, which is important because they keep introducing more of these kids. They introduced Ant-Man's daughter in the Ant-Man movies, and now they introduce Billy and Tommy in this show. And there's more to come as the story goes on. So I definitely think that's something Marvel is planning towards in the future. But yeah, this show felt like set up for more stuff going forward, and it should be interesting. Like, I think Wanda and Billy and Tommy are supposed to be in the next Doctor Strange movie, which makes sense with about her revelation that she has magical abilities. And she's now going by the Scarlet Witch, I guess, which feels, I thought she was already doing that. But yeah, it should be interesting going forward. But the overall message, and like I said, it started off quirky and interesting in the beginning, then just sort of started to fit the paradigm of what, like the setup of what we have. It became very comic booky at the end. And then the overall message of dealing with grief fell flat because it doesn't address Wanda victimizing other people and causing them their own grief and trauma. So overall, it was a good show, even if it didn't hit all the notes it was trying to, which is something that won't be unique to this show, but whatever. It was a good show. I gave it 2 thumbs up. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I like what it's set up going forward, and I look forward to what happens next. So, yeah, there's that.